In the summer of 1970, in a quiet Appalachian town nestled in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, two identical twin brothers set out on a 3-day hiking trip and were never seen again. For decades, their disappearance remained one of the region's most haunting mysteries. No bodies, no gear, not a trace. That is until one ordinary morning when a park ranger during a routine patrol stumbled across something he couldn't explain, something that had once belonged to only one of the twins. What truly happened on that mountain? If this story gripped you, don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe to our channel for more mysterious true stories that time almost forgot. That particular summer had been unrelentingly hot. The kind of southern heat that melted the tar on the roads and turned front porches into furnaces by noon. Locals in the town of Ash Hollow, Virginia, had grown accustomed to hiding away indoors during the fiercest parts of the day. But for the Dawson twins, the oppressive heat had never been a reason to stay still. It was just another challenge, another layer to the adventure. Daniel and Robert Dawson, both 23, had grown up with dirt under their fingernails and the scent of pine thick in their lungs. They were well known in Ash Hollow for their fearless love of the mountains that wrapped around the town like ancient guardians. They'd climbed every ridge, explored every trail, and could name the trees and rocks like old friends. Their father, named Hank Dawson, had raised them with reverence for the wild. The mountain gives, he'd often say, but it can take just as fast. Never turn your back on her. That August morning, the 15th to be exact, the brothers were loading up their dusty 1962 Ford pickup with camping gear, prepping for a trek to Eagles Peak, one of the least traveled summits in the Blue Ridge. Even the most seasoned locals avoided it, too isolated, too unpredictable. From the porch, their mother Evelyn watched them with a quiet ache in her chest. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" she asked, her voice thin, but edged with that maternal instinct that always knew when something was off. "You could wait for Kyle to get back from Raleigh. He knows that trail better than anyone." Daniel gave her a warm grin, tying the red bandana around his neck, the only visible distinction between the twins. "We've climbed Eagles Peak a dozen times, Mom. We'll be fine." Robert, careful and quiet as always, was double-checking his camera bag. The camera, a Nikon FM2, had been a graduation gift from their father. He never hiked without it. "We're hoping to catch the sunrise from the summit," he added. "They say this time of year the shadow the mountain casts looks just like an eagle spreading its wings across the valley. It'll be one hell of a photo." Evelyn sighed, defeated but resigned. Her boys had always moved as one. If one had a spark of an idea, the other would fan it into a fire. They didn't just share a face. They shared a soul split in two. She handed them an old two-way radio that had once belonged to Hank. "Just promise you'll check in every night." The brothers hugged her tight and, laughing, promising to return with the best shots she'd ever seen. Then they drove off the truck, kicking up a plume of red clay dust that hung in the morning air like a farewell. It would be the last time Evelyn Dawson saw her sons alive. 3 days passed, then 4. No radio calls, no sign of them. On the 5th day, Hank, stoic and weather-worn, gathered 20 men from the town, all men who knew the Blue Ridge like the back of their hand. They searched every trail, ravine, and grove around Eagles Peak for 2 full weeks. Nothing. No bags, no camera, no trace of campfires or footprints. It was as if the mountain had swallowed them whole. State police joined in. Dogs were brought. Helicopters swept overhead. Every person who might have seen the twins was questioned. But there were no answers, only silence. And over time, that silence grew heavier, until hope began to evaporate like mist under the mountain sun. Whispers crept into the town like Vine's old folk tales about the land itself turning on intruders. Stories of spirits that lured wanderers in endless loops until they collapsed from exhaustion. Of caves that didn't lead to anywhere on this earth. Of ancient gods still furious, still watching, punishing those who dared trespass on sacred ground. Hank Dawson never believed in ghost stories. He'd spent his entire life in those mountains and knew the real dangers were far more ordinary and far more lethal. A wrong step, a sudden storm, a chance run-in with smugglers using the backcountry trails to move product undetected. Any of those made more sense than whispered tales of vengeful spirits. But as the months crawled by with no word, not even Hank could keep doubt from creeping in. Evelyn lit candles each night, murmuring quiet prayers for a miracle that never came. The whole town shared in their grief at first, but life moved on as it always does. The mystery of the Dawson twins became something spoken of in hushed tones, a cautionary tale for young hikers with more confidence than sense. Still, Hank never stopped searching. Every weekend, he'd hike back up Eagle's Peak, always taking a new trail, diving into hidden ravines, probing through shadowed caves anywhere his sons might have gone to escape a storm or injury. With time, the trips grew less frequent. His legs tired faster. His breath didn't last as long, but he never gave up entirely. It was as though some part of him was waiting, sure that one day the mountain would give something back. Evelyn, meanwhile, kept their room untouched. The books, the maps, the photographs, the worn jackets still hanging on the back of the door. All of it remained just as Daniel and Robert had left it on that blazing morning in August. Some days, when the silence pressed too hard against her chest, she would slip quietly into their room and sit for hours, breathing in the fading scent of her sons and clutching at the fragments of the lives that had once filled the house with laughter. Time, that tireless river, moved forward. Ash Hollow, once a sleepy Appalachian village with gravel roads and wide front porches, slowly transformed. Outsiders arrived, drawn to the mountain beauty. Craft breweries opened in old barns. Bed and breakfasts replaced boarded-up stores. Streets that once echoed with cicadas now pulsed with the chatter of tourists. Evelyn and Hank aged together, their lives bound by love and by the wound that never quite healed. When Hank passed in 1995, he was buried with the map of Eagle's Peak folded inside his jacket, the same map he'd carried on every search. Each path marked in red ink, a lifetime of hope etched into faded paper. Evelyn stayed in the same house now, running a tiny inn to stay busy and keep the loneliness at bay. The walls were lined with photos of Daniel and Robert beaming beside campfires on summits, with arms flung around each other's shoulders. Sometimes guests would ask about the smiling young men in the pictures. She would simply reply, "They're traveling. They'll be home soon." It was easier than explaining a grief that spanned decades, a silence that had never truly broken. The mystery might have faded into memory, swallowed by time like so many other tragedies that go unresolved, except that in the spring of 2019, nearly 50 years after the twins vanished, something finally surfaced. A young park ranger named Michael Sutter was on a routine patrol deep in the remote northern stretch of what was now Eagle's Peak National Park. He'd heard the story of the Dawson brothers growing up. Who in Ash Hollow hadn't? But to him, born in 1990, it was little more than local legend, one of those eerie tales old-timers told over beer or beside campfires to warn against wandering too far from marked trails. He never imagined he'd be the one to stumble onto the first real clue in half a century. A clue that would unravel everything the town thought it knew about what happened to Daniel and Robert Dawson. Michael stopped short when something caught the light, a flicker of metal among the rocks nearly buried beneath decades of moss and dirt. He might have walked right past it if the late afternoon sun hadn't struck it at that exact angle, almost like the mountain itself had chosen that moment to surrender its secret. Carefully, he pushed aside the overgrowth with gloved hands, each movement slow, deliberate. What he uncovered stopped him cold. An old weather-worn camera, its metal body dulled and corroded by time and weather, but still unmistakable. The faded imprint of Kodak was just barely visible on the side. "No way," Michael whispered under his breath. He'd heard the stories everyone in Ash Hollow had. The Dawson twins' disappearance had become almost myth, a legend passed down like folklore. But to stumble across something tied directly to them after so many years, that was something else entirely. As he turned the camera over, he spotted something etched faintly on the underside. R. Dawson, Robert's initials. With trembling hands, Michael opened the back and found a roll of film still inside. It had been used, exposed. Maybe, just maybe, it held the last moments captured before the twins vanished into the wild. He marked the exact GPS coordinates and slipped the camera gently into his pack. This couldn't wait. Abandoning the rest of his scheduled patrol, he took the fastest route down the ridge. 3 hours later, Michael stood on the porch of the Dawson family home. Evelyn Dawson, now 94 and silver-haired, opened the door with a quiet dignity carved from decades of waiting. But when she saw the camera, her eyes lit with a brightness that had long been buried beneath grief. "It's Robert's," she said softly, running her fingers across the rusted body as though touching her son's cheek. Hank gave it to him and Daniel when they turned 18. Her frail hands shook as she held the one thing left that had actually touched her boy's life. "Where did you find it?" "North end of Copper Gulch," Michael explained. "Way off the standard trails that lead to Eagle's Peak." Evelyn frowned. The twins had never said anything about heading to that part of the range. Their plan had always been to summit from the Eastern Trail. "That's what's so strange," Michael added. "Where I found the camera, it didn't make any sense. It's not on any logical path. It's like they were running from something." The word hung in the space between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to say aloud. "The film," Evelyn said, suddenly her voice shaking but urgent. "Do you think anything can be recovered?" "I don't know," Michael admitted honestly. "It's been out there nearly 50 years. Water damage, heat. It's not likely, but I know a guy in Atlanta. He restores old film military-grade work. If anyone can salvage something, it's him." Hope, a feeling Evelyn had learned to suffocate just to survive, rose again, trembling and sharp in her chest. "Do it," she said, her voice steady. "And when you have the photos, I want to go with you. Back to where you found the camera." Michael hesitated. "Mrs. Dawson, that terrain is steep, rough, for someone your age." But she cut him off with a look that left no room for argument. "I've waited 49 years to know what happened to my boys. If the mountain's ready to speak, I'll be there to listen." 3 weeks later, Michael returned with a paper envelope clutched in his hand. The expert had managed to recover 7 images. They were damaged, faded, discolored, torn at the edges, but enough remained to start piecing together the story. The first showed Daniel grinning beside a rock formation, the red bandana still visible around his neck. The second captured a sunrise taken from what looked like halfway up the summit. The third showed the valley, but from an odd angle, one not accessible from the marked trails. Then came the fourth photo, and Evelyn gasped sharply, her hand flying to her mouth. It showed what looked like the mouth of a cave or tunnel nearly swallowed by thick foliage. In the lower corner of the frame, partially obscured, was what clearly looked like a military boot. "Someone else was there," she whispered. The final 3 images were too degraded to make out completely. One showed something metallic, maybe an antenna or a tower. Michael studied the photos, his brow furrowed. "This changes everything," he murmured. "People always assumed it was just an accident, that they got caught in a storm or fell into a ravine. No." Evelyn said, her voice hardening alive now with something fierce. "They found something they weren't supposed to, and someone didn't want it to be known." Michael nodded slowly. In 1970, deep in the Cold War, rumors had swirled through the region, tales of secret outposts, covert operations buried in the hills. Now those whispers didn't seem so far-fetched. "My boys weren't into politics," Evelyn Dawson said sharply, her voice brittle with grief and defiance. "All they wanted was to catch the sunrise from the top. Sometimes being in the wrong place at the wrong time is all it takes," Michael replied gently. 2 days later, against the advice of every doctor she'd ever seen, and with the help of a helicopter provided by national park authorities, Evelyn returned to the mountain that had stolen her sons. Michael was with her along with a small search team and a retired federal investigator who had taken an interest in the case. The chopper dropped them as close as possible to the site where the camera had been found. From there, Evelyn insisted on walking. "I need to feel the ground beneath me," she said. "I need the mountain to know I've come back for my boys." Leaning on her cane and on Michael's arm, she moved with a quiet determination. Using the exact GPS coordinates, they reached the spot. A narrow clearing framed by jagged stone and now marked off with official survey tape. "This is where I found it," Michael explained. "It was half buried like someone meant to hide it." Evelyn closed her eyes, breathing in the heavy silence, as though hoping the wind might carry the voices of her sons back to her. When she opened them, they settled on a rock formation about 100 yards away. "That one," she said, voice wavering. "That's the same rock in the first photo of Daniel." The group moved toward it. The shape matched exactly. They were retracing the twins' final steps. "If we follow the direction in the photo," Michael began scanning the slope. We'll reach the cave," the retired detective finished, pointing toward a patch of thick underbrush that had clearly gone untouched for decades. They pressed forward, each step more cautious than the last. The terrain wasn't charted on any official park maps, and the ground grew treacherous with every footfall. Then, behind a curtain of tangled bramble, it emerged the mouth of a cave, just as shown in the photograph. "Oh Lord," Evelyn whispered. "They found it." The detective stepped forward, casting his flashlight over the entrance. "There are marks on the rock," he said. "Someone tried to seal this place off a long time ago. Weather must have worn it open again." Michael turned to Evelyn. "Maybe you should wait here while we check inside." But she shook her head firmly. "I've waited 49 years. I won't wait another minute." And so, with nothing but her cane, her will, and the strength of a mother who had endured half a lifetime of unanswered prayers, Evelyn Dawson stepped into the darkness, the same darkness that had swallowed her sons all those years ago, ready to face whatever truth lay hidden there, no matter how painful. What they found within would forever reshape the story not just of the Dawson twins, but of the entire region, unearthing secrets that many had fought for decades to keep buried. Inside, the air was thick with cold moisture, each drop echoing like a ticking clock from somewhere deep within. Their flashlights cast eerie shadows across the walls, transforming the jagged stone into the illusion of ghostly figures watching from the dark. Evelyn pressed forward, leaning on Michael, her eyes adjusting slowly as they searched every crevice for signs of the past. "Boot prints," the detective said, kneeling, old but still visible. Several people were down here. They kept moving the tunnel, sloping gradually downward until it opened into a wide underground chamber. What they saw there brought silence to every mouth in the group. Scattered in the center were the remains of an old encampment, rusted food cans, torn bits of weathered military gear, broken cables, and across one wall, nearly erased by time and moisture, a faded emblem, a stylized eagle talons clutching what looked like an electronic device. "Operation Condor," the detective muttered, stepping closer. "I've seen this before on old declassified intelligence. A joint CIA program with several Latin American regimes back in the 70s. What would they be doing here?" Michael asked, crouching near the remains of the gear. "Surveillance, most likely," the detective replied. "This mountain offers a perfect vantage point. You could intercept anything from here." But Evelyn wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on a soft glimmer in the shadows, something catching the light faintly in the corner of the cave. She moved forward with trembling steps and knelt down, ignoring the stabbing ache in her joints. It was a red bandana, faded by time, frayed at the edges but unmistakable. "Daniel," she whispered, cradling it in her weathered hands. "My Daniel was here." The detective rushed over quickly. "Don't touch that with bare hands, Mrs. Dawson. It could be evidence." But Evelyn clutched the cloth to her chest, refusing to let go. "Evidence doesn't matter anymore. It's been 50 years. What matters is they were here, and someone out there knows what happened to them." While she spoke, Michael noticed something else, a narrow gap in the far wall, partly blocked by stones that looked deliberately placed. "There's another passage here," he called out, "and it looks like someone tried to seal it." Together, the group cleared the rocks, revealing a slim tunnel that led deeper into the heart of the mountain. The air drifting from within was cool, fresh enough to suggest it might connect to the outside somewhere far ahead. "We should wait for backup," one of the team members advised. "No telling what's inside." But Evelyn was already stepping into the narrow opening, her son's bandana clenched tightly in her hand. "A mother always follows the scent of her cubs," she said quietly. "No one's stopping me now." The tunnel wound endlessly through the mountain, twisting like it followed some long-forgotten fault line. After what felt like an eternity, the passage widened again, and a faint light appeared ahead. They emerged into a second chamber, much larger than the first. A shaft of sunlight beamed down from a hole in the ceiling, casting a golden spotlight across the center of the cavern. And there, illuminated by that natural beam, were the remains of what looked like a long-abandoned radio station. Rusted consoles, broken antennas, crumbling reel-to-reel machines, all of it left behind in a rush, judging by the way the equipment lay scattered across the floor. A covert listening post, the detective confirmed, crouching by a rusted transmitter. Just as I suspected. But Evelyn wasn't paying attention to the hardware. Her eyes were locked on something carved into the stone wall right where the light struck. Slowly, she moved closer, squinting through the shadows. Names. 2 names carved deep into the rock. Daniel Dawson, 1970. Robert Dawson, 1970. And beneath them, a message simple, raw, and devastating. "Mom, Dad, we love you. Forgive us for not coming back." Evelyn collapsed to her knees before the makeshift epitaph, a broken sob escaping from her chest. Michael rushed to catch her, terrified that the weight of it all might be too much. "They were alive," she cried, running her fingers gently over the carved letters. Long enough to leave this behind. The detective scanning the rest of the wall called out in a grave voice, "Mrs. Dawson, you'll want to see this." She moved toward him, leaning on Michael for support. Beneath the names, there were more words etched hastily as if time had been slipping away. "If someone finds this, know the truth." My brother Daniel and I stumbled on this station while trying to find the best spot to photograph the sunrise. They caught us, said we were communist spies. Daniel tried to run. They shot him. He's buried under the large oak tree near the eastern entrance. I've been kept here. They make me work the equipment. I know electronics. I hear their plans. They're intercepting communications, tracking dissidents throughout the region. I don't think they'll need me much longer. If you're reading this, tell our parents we love them, and what we discovered here must be known. The date scratched at the bottom read October 12, 1970, almost 2 months after the boys had vanished. Evelyn read the message again and again, her tears dripping onto the stone, soaking into the dust of decades. "Robert survived longer," she whispered. "And Daniel, my Daniel is buried here, somewhere in this mountain." The detective, methodical and focused, continued scanning the cavern, his flashlight sweeping across forgotten history. "There are signs of a struggle here," the detective said, his flashlight sweeping over gouges in the stone wall and what looked disturbingly like dark, dried stains on the ground. "And this looks like old blood. What happened to them?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who would do something like this?" "The Cold War gave rise to monsters on every side," the detective replied grimly. "Black Ops forced disappearances off the books facilities, all in the name of national security." Evelyn Dawson stood silent, her eyes locked on her son's names etched into the stone, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. It was firm, edged with something fierce and unshakable. "I want you to find that oak tree," she said. "I want Daniel brought home, and I need to know what happened to Robert. If he left this message, if he was still alive in October, then where did he go?" The team made a decision. Half would head back toward the surface to arrange a formal excavation and secure the site for investigation. The rest, Michael, the detective, Evelyn, and 2 other members, continued exploring the cave system, driven by the hope of uncovering more. It was in a smaller chamber off the main cavern that they made their most chilling discovery, yet a stack of half-burned documents protected from moisture only by a degraded sheet of plastic. It looked like someone had tried to destroy them in a rush, but hadn't finished the job. Among the charred pages were military reports, name lists, transcripts of intercepted communications, and one document that made everyone in the room go still, a typed order dated October 15, 1970, just 3 days after Robert's final message had been carved into the wall. "Dismantle Eagle Station. Eliminate all evidence. No witnesses." Evelyn held the page in her shaking hands. She didn't need further explanation. Those final 4 words, "no witnesses," spoke volumes. "At least now I know," she whispered, her voice quivering but clear. "After 50 years, I know they didn't just vanish. They fought. They held on. They were brave until the end." As the sun dipped lower, its rays stretched through the natural skylight above, casting long shadows across the dusty cave floor. Evelyn Dawson sat quietly on the ground, the red bandana of her son wrapped tightly in one hand, the last message of her other son gripped in the other. And for the first time in 5 decades, she allowed herself to grieve without restraint. Her tears washed away years of silence, of anguish long buried beneath hope and disbelief. Yet amidst that sorrow, a fire remained lit inside her, a quiet, unyielding resolve. Even at 94 years old, Evelyn Dawson would not rest until justice was served. The story of the Dawson twins sent shockwaves across the nation. What began with the chance discovery of an old camera in the Appalachian wilderness had erupted into a full-blown scandal that forced the federal government to declassify Cold War intelligence records. The media called it the ghost station of the Blue Ridge, and for weeks it dominated headlines. The burial site Robert had described beneath a great oak near the Eastern Trail was found. The remains were confirmed to be Daniel's. 50 years later, he was finally laid to rest with honor. The entire town of Ash Hollow gathered to pay tribute, walking silently behind the casket as Evelyn followed with Daniel's bandana tied around her wrist. As for Robert, no remains were found, not in the cave nor anywhere nearby. But within those scorched documents, a single word kept surfacing: relocated. It was underlined in one report, a bureaucratic euphemism whose meaning everyone understood too well. 6 months after the cave was uncovered, Evelyn received an unexpected call. The director of the National Archive of Security requested her presence in Washington, D.C. Something had surfaced that might be of interest. Michael insisted on coming along. Over those months, the young ranger had become like a surrogate grandson to her, visiting, frequently helping her manage the media chaos and the emotionally draining process of burial and identification. "Try not to get your hopes up, Mrs. Dawson," he warned gently during the train ride. "It might just be more paperwork, more confirmation of what we already know." Her face, however, remained calm. "I'm not looking for miracles, Michael," she said. "I just want the truth, whatever form it takes." At the National Archive, a serious-looking man in thick-rimmed glasses led them through rows of file-laden corridors to a small, quiet briefing room. There, a woman in a military uniform waited, her posture upright, her presence commanding. "I'm General Ramirez," she said, offering Evelyn her hand. "I head the Commission on Historical Transparency. What we're about to show you was found in declassified U.S. military files recently shared with us through a joint historical disclosure agreement." On the table lay a sealed folder. General Ramirez opened it with deliberate care and pulled out several black and white photographs, laying them out in front of Evelyn Dawson. "These were taken in 1971 at an interrogation facility in Panama," she said. "It was jointly operated by the CIA and Latin American military units." Evelyn leaned in, eyes narrowed as she strained to see. In the first image, a young man appeared, gaunt, his head shaved, dressed in prison-issued clothes. Despite the harsh lighting and physical decline, the face was unmistakable. "Robert," she whispered, her fingers trembling as they hovered over his image. "According to these records, the general explained your son was transported to Panama for extended interrogation. They believed he had ties to guerrilla groups due to his technical expertise and the fact that he uncovered the listening station. My son repaired radios and old TVs in town." Evelyn protested, her voice sharp with disbelief. "He wasn't involved in any politics." "We understand that now," the general nodded solemnly. "But back then, Cold War paranoia justified just about anything." Michael studied the remaining photos. They showed Robert at various points during questioning, confined in a cell, being escorted by armed guards. "What happened to him?" he asked, already fearing the answer. The general hesitated before continuing. "According to official documents, Robert Dawson died during interrogation in February of 1972. Evelyn closed her eyes as if the room itself were spinning. She had long suspected this outcome, but hearing it confirmed pierced through her with raw finality. The general, however, wasn't finished. She drew one last document from the folder, an intelligence report dated 1973. Much of the text had been blacked out, entire paragraphs swallowed in thick redaction lines. But at the bottom, a handwritten note stood out. "Subject RD transferred to special program under new identity. Classification: ultra confidential. Do you understand what this means?" Evelyn asked, her voice almost too soft to hear. "It means," the general explained carefully, "that there's a chance your son didn't die in 1972. Some detainees with specialized skills were absorbed into covert government programs. Their identities were erased. Officially, they ceased to exist." A heavy silence fell across the room. Michael was the first to speak. "Are you telling us that Robert Dawson could still be alive?" "There's a possibility," the general answered cautiously. "Though after all these years, he'd be 73, Evelyn said quickly. "I'm 94. That's not old." A flicker of dangerous hope sparked in her eyes, fragile but blazing. "We've launched a discreet search," the general continued. "We're combing through records of individuals relocated under those classified programs from that era. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But..." She was interrupted by the door opening behind her. An aide stepped in and handed her a note. She scanned it, her face shifting from composed professionalism to open surprise. "Seems we may not need to search any further," she said, looking up at Evelyn. "There's someone here who's asked to see you." The man who entered leaned heavily on a cane, his back slightly stooped with age. His white hair was neatly combed back, and a pair of metal-framed glasses rested on the bridge of his nose. The lines etched into his face bore witness to the years he'd endured, but those eyes still burned with a familiar light. Evelyn rose slowly, her entire body trembling. "Robert," she whispered, her voice breaking. He nodded, tears already streaming down his cheeks. "Mom," he said softly. For what felt like an eternity, they simply stared at each other, two souls that had weathered decades of silence, pain, and unanswered questions. And then, like gravity had pulled them together, they fell into an embrace that carried the weight of 50 lost years. "I looked for you," Evelyn cried against her son's shoulder. "I never stopped." "I know, Mom," he replied, his voice choked. "I always knew." When they finally pulled apart, Robert, who would later explain that his name had been changed to Robert Navarro, glanced around the room as if searching for something. "Dad?" he asked, his voice tentative. Evelyn shook her head gently. "He passed 25 years ago, but he waited for you, every day until the very end." Robert nodded slowly, accepting the wound of that loss with quiet grace. Then he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small, worn wooden flute, its surface faded with age and use. "Dad made this," he said softly, holding it out to her under her stunned gaze. "He gave it to me the day Daniel and I left for the mountains." Robert said, his voice trembling as he held out the small wooden flute. "They let me keep it all these years. It was the only piece of you I had left." Evelyn's hands reached for the flute, unsteady but sure. The moment her fingers touched the carved wood, she recognized it instantly. Hector had made flutes just like this for both boys when they were young. "Daniel had one too," she whispered. "We never found it." Robert gave a soft, sorrowful smile. He had it with him when he tried to run. The weight of that memory settled over the room like a slow-moving fog, thick with meaning and pain too deep for words. After a long pause, Michael, who had stood silently witnessing the reunion with tears clinging to his lashes, finally spoke. "What happened after all that, sir?" he asked gently. Robert let out a long, weary breath. "It's a long and bitter story," he said. "They forced me into telecommunications work for intelligence agencies. I was watched, constantly moved from place to place. When they finally released me in the 90s, I was warned never reach out to my family, never speak of my past. They said there were still people who'd want to keep me quiet." "What changed?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady but searching. "The cave," he said. "The moment they found it, everything shifted. Suddenly it was all over the news. My past couldn't hurt me anymore. And when I saw your name, when I realized you were still alive, that you never stopped looking," his voice cracked, the years breaking through. "I knew it was time to come home." Evelyn cupped his face in her frail hands, her thumbs brushing softly against the worn lines carved by time and sorrow. She studied him the way a mother memorizes a newborn, like each scar, each wrinkle, each flicker in his eyes was sacred. "Now we are whole," she whispered. "Daniel is at peace, and you've come back. Our family is whole again." Robert nodded, unable to speak. Instead, he raised the flute to his lips and began to play a gentle, aching melody their father had taught them as children. The notes drifted into the room like smoke from a long-extinguished fire, tender and mournful, yet filled with life. The music carried across the years, stitching the past and the present together, threading healing through wounds that had ached in silence for 50 long years. And in that moment, as the music wrapped around them, mother and son understood something deeper than words, that no matter how painful, some stories must be told in full. Because only in truth, even when it comes too late, can peace be found. The end.